My name is Catherine Nocton and I'm the Director of the European Disability Forum, and you're all extremely welcome to this workshop we have today on the work of the European Ombudsman. So I would like to start by giving you some information, some practical information about this 1 hour workshop today. So basically, you can keep your microphone off while you're not speaking. So for all of us now, after a year and a half of online meetings, we realize that the sound quality is better when our microphones are off. You will see international sign interpretation. You can ask Raquel if you would like to pin interpreter. We have real-time captioning in English. So if you look in the chat box, you'll find the link. There is also automated translation of the caption into Czech, Dutch, Portuguese, Slovenian, and Spanish. These were the languages that were requested. Any technical questions, just contact us, use the chat box, contact Raquel, and you can raise your hand using the reactions button, but you could also use Alt+Y to raise your hand. Now, you may notice that the session is being recorded, and that's for internal use. So this is not published externally, it's for taking notes and sharing with our members in our members area. So you can go to the next slide. So the first thing I would like to do is explain why we have the workshop today. So as a European Disability Forum, we work very closely with the European Ombudsman's office. And we realize that because of COVID-19 and the situation we've been in the last year and a half, that we haven't had the European Ombudsman's office staff at any of our meetings or had any open or public events with the Ombudsman. And so we wanted to present to you again how the European Ombudsman works, what their role is, and how they work as they're members also of the EU's independent framework for monitoring the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So rather than EDF explaining to you what the Ombudsman's Office does, we're extremely happy today to have colleagues from the European Ombudsman's Office with us. We have Marta Hirsch-Zimbinska, who's the Principal Advisor on Charter Compliance at the European Ombudsman's Office. And we also have Valentina Stuva, who's the Inquiries Officer at the European Ombudsman's Office. And so they're going to explain in more detail how the European Ombudsman's Office is working to promote the Convention, to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. And then we also have Camille, who is the Development Officer for the European Network on Independent Living, who's going to explain how ENIL has worked in raising complaints to the European Ombudsman. And our purpose of having this workshop today is to have us as EDF and all of us as EDF members more aware of the role of the Ombudsman and more ready to use and communicate with the Ombudsman, because the Ombudsman's office, of course, is very much complaint driven. So they need to hear from us. They need to hear how things are going for them to be able to do their work in monitoring the CRPD. So our hope is that the work of the Ombudsman becomes more alive or revived within EDF and the disability movement. So with that explanation, I would like to first give the floor to Marta, with my great thanks for you being with us today, Marta, to tell us from your side about the work that you're doing. And I'm going to turn off my camera so people can focus on you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to the European Disability Forum. This was your wonderful idea. And we felt also on our side for a longer period of time that we need to come together and we need to speak to your members about our work because we are here for you. And sometimes we have the impression that we don't underline this too much. And this would be a wonderful occasion today in this 1 hour to tell you what we are doing at the office, how our procedures are looking like from the perspective of you potential complainants to the Ombudsman, And also we will speak about some complaints and some investigations we follow with as regards the rights of persons with disabilities and the compliance with CPD. What I would like to start about is just for you to remember, if there are rights, there are obligations. If there are obligations, you have to ask those who are obliged to comply with your rights to do so. And don't be shy, go to the Ombudsman if you have a problem with the European Union administration, because we are, again, we are for you. And I will follow a bit the PowerPoint which we prepared. I am here with my dear colleague Valentina, who will speak in particular about our cases concerning the rights of persons with disabilities. I will just speak about the Ombudsman in general. We will try to do it within 30 minutes to leave as much time as possible for your questions, and we hope that we'll be able to answer these questions. I will tell you as well that I am working in this office already 20 years, so it's such a huge period of time, provided that the institution is a bit more than 25 years old. So I'd say that I spent a lot of my professional life, and I'm not so young anymore, unfortunately, there. And I spent all this time here, because this job makes sense. I think really we are able to help people. And I will try to explain you why. Okay, so please, next slide. The Ombudsman, European Ombudsman is linked to European citizenship. We had a Maastricht Treaty, and we had European citizenship, and immediately after that, we had the European Ombudsman. European Ombudsman started its existence, I already mentioned, almost 25 years, a bit more than 25 years. We celebrated quite recently 25 years. We have the first European Ombudsman was the Ombudsman from Finland, Jakob Söderman, who had a very difficult job to create the funding for this institution and to explain to the entire world of the European Union, which was not yet at that time European Union, I mean, what we do, what we could do for the citizens of the Union. We have now 2 offices, while the European Ombudsman sits in Strasbourg in France. We have also quite a big office in Brussels. Altogether, we are not a big office. We are only 75 people, a bit more. Of those, about 20 lawyers and 10 legal trainees, junior lawyers, who work with us during 1 year. And the rest is communication and administration, of course, the cabinet of the Ombudsman as well. After Jakob Söderman, the second European Ombudsman was Nikiforos Diamandouros, who was national ombudsman in Greece in his previous life. And now, already the second mandate is Emily O'Reilly, who was also national ombudsman in her another life in Ireland. So as you see, European Ombudsman have strong links to national ombudsman. And to explain what the European Ombudsman does, so what we do at the European Union level, for you is enough to think what your national ombudsman does, and then you will be able to understand better what is our field of activity, what are our competences, how we can help you. And you see here the picture of Emily O'Reilly, our current ombudsman. She was also a journalist and editor, which helps a lot because, as I will explain you later, the ombudsman's decisions are not binding, and we need really a press to be on our side to have a meaningful presence in the European Union landscape, and also to push the institutions to do what Emily O'Reilly thinks they should do. Well, I will speak about what Emily O'Reilly did and what is our strategy for next years a bit later, but I think it's good for you to visualize who the ombudsman is, because many say, and I think it's quite right, that European Ombudsman is the human face of the European Union. You cannot separate the office from the person who is the holder of the office. And voila, and then in this way, you can see who is now the Ombudsman. Next slide, please. How the Ombudsman works. So Katrin was already kind to mention we are complaints business. So like national ombudsman, the same. I mean, they also receive complaints, they deal with complaints, they investigate complaints, and then they have some possibilities what to do with their investigations. The ombudsman's decisions are not binding. This is very important to remember for two reasons. Because if you have a problem at national level, European level, you can choose to claim your rights two ways, actually. You could go to the court and you could go to the national ombudsman in your country. If in your country you have national ombudsman, we don't have national ombudsman in the European Union in Italy so far. In Germany, we have Committee on Petitions of Bundestag, which plays similar role. We have in some countries regional ombudsman who are very strong. Anyway, the ombudsmen are almost present everywhere in the European Union member states, but also in Brussels and in Strasbourg as regards complaints concerning European Union administration. So we do complaints business. We receive complaints from individuals, but also, I mean, from citizens like me and you. We receive complaints from national NGOs, so non-governmental organizations. We may receive complaints from law offices as well. We may receive complaints from businesses. But I would say that majority of our complaints are coming either from citizens, from individuals, or from NGOs and other organizations which are involved in European business somehow. So they receive grants, they take part, in different European Union programs. And this is how people have a contact with the European Union, because to have a problem with European Union administration, you have first to have a contact with this administration, right? And then those who have contacts and are not happy with what is the outcome of the contact, they can come to the European Ombudsman. But dealing with complaints is one part of our work. There is also another part which is extremely important, and this was really emphasizes this by Emily O'Reilly, and she gave a lot of her time and energy to create in our office something new, namely strategic inquiries. The Ombudsman can, on the basis of the treaties, starting from the very first day of the existence of the office, can run own initiative inquiries. What it does mean? There are investigations which are decided by Ombudsman on his or her own motion when he or she thinks that there is a systemic problem and his interventions is necessary to resolve the problem. I quite simplify, but Emily O'Reilly put a lot of emphasis on that, and she call it the own initiative inquiries, strategic inquiries. She looks for public interest into the subjects which she would like to following on the basis of her own initiative powers. Of course, strategic inquiries, they should not be so many. We have to deal with each complaint which comes to us, and we never deny justice to whoever could be. Of course, there are some procedural requirements, but if you have a complaint, you come to the Ombudsman and could hope, if procedurally everything is correct, that we will deal with the complaint. And there are many complaints. But strategic inquiries, we cannot launch so many, because to launch it, we have to have a systemic problem. If the Ombudsman feels that there is an issue and she could help to resolve the issue if she step in. So our work, complaints and strategic inquiries. Next slide, please. Yes, how many complaints? I said a lot. Well, I mean, you have a number, 2,148, it was last year. Imagine we have just 20 lawyers, so it's really a huge number compared to the number of people who deal with these complaints, and also compared to the huge amount of people who are living in the European Union, because to complain to the Ombudsman, you need to be either citizens of the European Union member state or just live on the territory of the European Union. So it's compared to the number of people who live in the Union, maybe this number is not so big, But if you see, I mean, yeah, we have just very small office. It's quite a huge number. And then we open by year, and this is quite the same number for years. So last year it was 370 investigations opened by the ombudsman, opened, which means we receive a complaint and then we deal with it. We ask the institution for their opinions. We can see the documents. We use all procedural toolbox we have to deal with the complaint, and we close the complaint by a decision. So 370, this is normally 400, a bit more than 400, but this number is quite stable. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yes, now who is complaining and from which countries we receive the highest number of complaints? Interestingly or not, we receive quite a lot from Belgium. I mean, these numbers, of course, how many complaints is one thing and how many investigations is another thing. So if you see these numbers, it's also related to complaints on the basis of which we're able to launch investigations. So we receive quite a lot of Belgian cases, and we open quite a lot of inquiries on the basis of Belgian complaints. But this is natural, because if the ombudsman, not if, the ombudsman is dealing with complaints concerning instances of maladministration by the European Union institutions, bodies, and agencies. These agencies, not maybe so many, but institutions, bodies, I mean, they are in Brussels. So it's quite natural that we receive a lot of complaints from Belgium. But we receive also quite a lot of complaints from Spain. And we open quite considerable number of each year, on the base, we open investigation on the basis of complaints coming from Spanish NGOs and Spanish citizens. Next slide, please. Now, yes, I mentioned this large definition, against whom you can complain to the European Ombudsman, so institutions, bodies, agencies. But in concreto, who is, of course, the first institution against which we receive a lot of complaints is the European Commission. For obvious reasons, this is our executive power at the European Union. So if you normally have a contact with the European administration, quite sure this will be the Commission, because you send the Commission request for access to documents, you think if you need some information, you think about the Commission and send a letter to the Commission. If there are grounds, funds, whatever could be, this is all dealt by the Commission. So Commission is our, let's say, the first target. Then we have used to have even more quite a number of complaints concerning EPSO, specifically at the time when I joined the European Ombudsman office. You know, it was when we had the first big accession to the European Union. I am Polish. So we received hundreds of complaints from people who took part in the open competitions for European posts. This tendency now is not such. We have less complaints against EPSO, which is in charge of organization of this complaint, of these competitions, but still there are complaints. We have a number of complaints about actions of European External Action Service, or action or lack of action, of course, about complaints about Olaf, quite not much about European Parliament. Here, important thing, we can only deal with administrative activity. We cannot go into political activity. We cannot go into judicial activity, which means that for European Parliament, we can only deal with their staff cases, so labor law problems, or let's say contractual problems. So European Parliament seen as the administration, not European Parliament seen as a political body. We cannot deal with politics. Now, European Investment Bank is also one of our targets for years already. Even we have special memorandum of understanding with European Investment Bank because they started receiving so many complaints themselves that we said we have to help them somehow, and we we encouraged them to set up complaints mechanism to deal at the first instance with complaints. European Central Bank is also another target, and of course, agencies. These agencies are almost everywhere. And I hope I don't see your faces, but I am sure you are coming from the countries where you have European Union agency. And I hope you can identify where these agencies are, exactly what they are doing, and what possibilities they could offer for you, because maybe it's an avenue for the future, for instance, looking for interesting traineeships or even posts. Anyway, European agencies like Frontex, like European Asylum Agency, which is now called yet still support agency, like medicine agency. We have about 40 agencies, so it's a lot of agencies, and we receive complaints about them. And all others, so we put them all together. All others could be different bodies which are created in the European Union level, or even European schools. Even if we started European school, Valentina, we speak about this, we look at mostly at the Commission's actions towards the schools. Next slide, please. Yes, now, what high-profile complaints we say? You know, first, each complaint is important. Each complaint is important. It's, of course, we have some complaints which are more interesting for the press, for maybe for the Commission itself, you know, for Parliament, but for citizens maybe in general. But each person who are coming with a problem to the European Ombudsman will be heard, and we will deal with the problem. So each complainant is really very important for us. We don't put aside complaints, we read all complaints, we try to do what we can to help people resolve their problem. Well, here we have this high profile complaint. So more public interest, you know, more press about this, etc. Katrin mentioned already COVID-19. We live it through, we live it through very difficult time, very special times. We will never forget this experience. But we, at the European Ombudsman Office, we tried within our work to ensure that whatever was done by the European administration, it was transparent. This means that people, citizens, could know what is happening in Brussels and in Luxembourg and in Strasbourg, mostly in Brussels, and that nothing should be done from European money under the table. And this, for the Ombudsman, was really extremely important because, as you know, it was an emergency situation, and this is quite a tendency everywhere. If there is emergency situation, you try to forget the rules and you do things quickly because, of course, it's emergency. But if you do things quickly, this could be extremely dangerous because you could forget the rights, you could forget the procedure, and the administration should function quickly, yes, if the situation requires that, but compliant with the principle binding on it. So we look into the transparency of vaccine procurement, public procurement. This was very important, I think, and useful investigation. Another kind of investigations, you know, contractual cases, is quite a number, but this one mentioned on the on the side is rather the issue of transparency of conflict of interest, because in this specific case, Commission awarded the contract to the private business, which could have a profit from this contract. Actually, they were asked by the Commission to prepare a project for the legislation, and then they could take a profit from this legislation because of what they were doing. So it was not transparent, the choice of the BlackRock to be awarded the contract. We have completely different issues like trade agreement and impact assessment. Before this mentioned here, European Union Mercosur trade agreement and sustainability impact assessment. We've heard, for instance, European Union Vietnam trade agreement and lack of human rights impact assessment, which we investigated and criticized the Commission for this lack. Another completely different subject, we have quite a number of investigations concerning the asylum and migration law. And we dealt recently with the situation at the Croatian borders, but from the perspective of European funds, because European funds, as Camille certainly will speak about this, cannot be disbursed if there is no compliance with fundamental rights, if there is not compliance with United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Well, I'm coming very soon to the end, just to speak to you. May I ask for the next slide, please? It's another revolving door. You know, this is also something which we deal a lot. Revolving door is, I'm curious how the translators translate it, because it's not easy to explain, you know, but if you see the image of this buildings, which I hate the revolving doors. Normally, if I go to the building and I enter this, you know, revolving, going around doors, I cannot go away normally, you know, because something happens technically. So this is the image to show to the people that if you work, let's say, in private practice, and then you go to the public administration, you could bring with you some interests from the private practice and use the public administration for your interests, and vice versa. If you work in the European public administration, also national level, and at a certain point of time, you change, of course, you have a right to change the job, you have a right to look for another job and to work somewhere where you want, but not completely, because if you work at, let's say, the commission with the state aid cases, or, you know, even contractual cases, and then you go to the private business, which could have profit of the cases you dealt with in your past life as an administrator, as a member of the staff of the commission, then this is the revolving door problem. This is the conflict of interest, which we, of course, it is possible, once again, to move somewhere, but there are conditions specified in law how you can do it, or sometimes you cannot do it. And we had a number of complaints concerning this. One here on the slide is concerning European Banking Authority revolving doors issue. I will try to finish in 3 minutes. May I see the next slide, Maureen, please? Yeah, this is another complaint, you know, completely other area. There are so-called staff cases for us. So there are cases concerning this labor law, because the European administration, as you know, employs a lot of people, and also employs, I use this word employed because this is our perspective, trainees. And trainees, in our perspective, should be paid. So they are employed, should be paid, and not work for nothing. And there were cases like European External Action Service, they didn't pay trainees. They just required them to go to Japan, for instance, where the life is extremely expensive. And you know, the parents pay for them, or who, I don't know. So, and then these guys worked very hard at the European Union delegation in Tokyo, for instance, for nothing, you know. So this is not correct. The Ombudsman intervened and she was successful. Now we change it, the approach, and we have now the rules, administrative rules, which provides that these people should be paid. So this is a very good example maybe for you how practical issues we could also resolve. And now I would like to go to the procedure just to end this. The procedure is, here we have a slide about European Union documents and access to documents, which is one of very important areas of our work. But generally, I will just quickly tell you about the procedure, because I hope you will come to us as complainants. So quickly, who could complain to the European Ombudsman? I already said European citizens, but not only, people who live in the European Union territory. So even temporarily, we don't check whether you have a kind of green card, whatever, card of whatever. If you are at the European Union territory, then you can complain to the Ombudsman. You can complain only against European administration. This I underlined several times. So Commission, Parliament, etc., not national authorities. For national authorities, we have these guys who are here mentioned, European Network of Ombudsman, so national ombudsman, your ombudsman in your countries. And if we receive a complaint concerning national authorities, we normally transfer them to our national colleagues. Then you can complain about maladministration. I already mentioned, we don't touch politics. We don't go against the Court of Justice, you know, and saying whether the judgments are correct. We just deal with administrative activity. Okay, so this is important. So yes, I see it's a question from Maren Steph. Maybe we'll go to the questions later on. That would be possible, okay, when we finish. But as I told you, this is important to keep in mind, because we receive quite a number of complaints which are not admissible for us because they are not about what we can do. And you have to come to the Ombudsman within 2 years after you know about the fact which is the source of the problem. And you have to comply with the procedural requirement, which is extremely important for us, namely we call it pre-administrative approaches. So before you escalate, the case to the Ombudsman, you have to try to resolve the issue with the institution which causes the problem. You have to write, let's say, to the Commission, you didn't receive a document, you asked for a document. The Commission didn't deny it you access to document. Then you have to come back to the Commission according to the rules which exist in special regulation. And once the Commission has, let's say, second chance to look into the problem and still the problem is not resolved, you come to the Ombudsman. So this is very important as well. Now, how you can submit the complaints? Very easy. We are not the court. You don't need a lawyer to come to the Ombudsman. You can just come your own. You don't need even to be affected by the problem you want to complain about. This is why we have so many complaints from NGOs. About systemic issues, not only individual problems, so not on behalf of somebody, but generally. You can complain by using complaint form. You can complain by writing a letter. I believe we have a telephone number which functions all the time. If you need a special help or whatever, how we could receive your complaint, you just could call. I mean, this should be considered, access to the Ombudsman should be very easy. And it is, actually. If you try, you will see. Compared to the court, is no comparison, actually. It's really easy. We take on board everything what we receive. Even the people don't need to say, yes, we complain, this is the complaint. It's just enough to speak about the problem. We will classify this correspondence, this communication as a complaint. Well, so quickly about the procedures. What I would like you to remember is exactly this. We have a large number, but quite limited anyway. But we will help you as much as we can, even if your complaint is about national administration. We try to work with our national colleagues to help you. The access to the Ombudsman is easy, without costs, and you don't need to submit evidence. We will help with the evidence ourselves. You just have to submit the case, in a sense, tell us what is the problem, and show to us that you tried to resolve the problem already with the institution you complained against. Very well. Now I will give floor to Valentina, because 20 years in the office, I could speak hours and hours, but you have to stop me. So now Valentina, please. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martha. Just to let everyone know, Martha will be with us for the end. So we'll see which questions aren't already handled in the discussion, and we'll take them at the end. And I just want to say, I realize now we needed longer than 1 hour because people will have a lot of questions and different issues. So if anyone feels like their question is unanswered by the end, we'll make sure we take note of everything so that we can answer things also by writing and make a fuller report. So don't worry, anyone, if you think that your question will not be attended to. I'm keeping a very close eye. Thank you so much, Martha. And I give the floor to Valentina.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here today with you. Thank you so much, Marta. I think what we really want to communicate today to you is we couldn't underline enough about our office, and that it's a dynamic and flexible, and that we indeed try to use our procedures and everything available within our mandate to try to help. So maladministration itself being such a dynamic concept, we're not looking into whether something is only contrary to the law, but we're also inquiring if certain actions are service-minded, citizen-friendly, if something has not been done but should have been done on the part of the EU administration. So I think this is really at the heart of what our office is about. Marta already presented very well, in a way, the checklist of what needs to be in place for us to be able to look into the complaint, for us to consider the complaint within our mandate. So already, maybe just to underline again, that we receive complaints for citizens, but also not only from EU citizens, anyone who is residing in the EU, a company, an organization, journalists, academics who are within in the EU, we receive complaints and can deal with complaints coming from those people. A complainant does not need to be personally affected by the problem. Again, this is an open wide door, different than how courts normally operate. And the ombudsman can also use her own initiative powers to open investigations. So even if a complaint has not been lodged, if something has been brought to our attention, we could open an investigation. So what I would like to talk about, to add to Marta's wonderful explanations, is really a sample of complaints and own investigations that we have carried that are related to disabilities. I think I will underline 3 types of issues or 3 topics. Recruitment to the EU institutions, a little bit was already mentioned. There is the European Personnel Selection Office. This is the body that recruits people to work for the EU. Another topic is accessibility of websites and tools, online tools used by the EU. And then I would like to also mention our work in the field of deinstitutionalization and European funds. So we could move to the next slide. These are 2 complaints, and then if you click on our website, for all complaints that we mentioned today, there are the numbers. You will be able to see the decisions, to read in all details what has happened in those investigations. The first topic is about recruitment by the EU institutions, how members of the public can start working for the EU bodies, agencies, offices. So back in 2017, we received a complaint from 2 candidates in competitions organized by the European Personnel Selection Office. The candidates were visually impaired, and the complaints, they came independently of each other. We looked into them together. They related to the online form and the form for requesting reasonable accommodation, and whether those were accessible. And the complaint was that they were not fully accessible for people like themselves. What the complainants also said was that the reasonable accommodation options that they had selected, that were announced to be available, were not actually available to them when they were sitting the tests, and that generally the measures put in place by the selection office meant that they could not sit their tests independently. Next slide, please. So what the Ombudsman did in those cases is she opened an inquiry into the concrete cases, but also more generally into asking the European Personnel Selection Office how it makes selection procedures accessible for people who are visually impaired. The Ombudsman inquired into this, sent a series of questions to EPSO, and ultimately, based on the information received, concluded that EPSO had not done enough to accommodate the 2 complainants. She also issued a series of suggestions and asked EPSO to ensure that its online application form becomes fully compliant with accessibility requirements for visually impaired candidates. And she also called for assistive technologies to be made available during the computer-based tests. Next slide, please. EPSO replied positively to the Ombudsman's recommendations. They expressed their will to work towards these improvements. In particular, they already said that they are working into updating and upgrading the systems, which would significantly improve accessibility for candidates. And in the concrete cases, they also proposed that people to be able to sit tests from home. Following the inquiry, we also sought feedback from the complainants themselves. And on the next slide, we can see several of the observations that the complainants themselves put forward after having received the Commission's reply. Generally, the complainants in these cases welcomed the Commission's willingness to improve the system, but on the other hand, they regretted that the Commission was not able to indicate within what time all these improvements will be put in place. And in concrete, the applications form, there's a concrete fields that need to be filled in. And it was regrettable that the Commission, sorry, not the Commission, but the European Personal Selection Office was not able to concretely say when those will be improved. The next topic in which we opened an investigation was actually an own initiative, on the Ombudsman own initiative, and that concerned the accessibility for persons with disabilities of websites and online tools managed by the European Commission. That strategic work resulted from observations made by the CRPD committee, and it took into account the standards set forth by the UN CRPD and also by the European Union's its own directive on accessibility of public sector bodies, websites, and mobile applications. After the Ombudsman, our office had an exchange with the Commission to find out how it implements and how it meets these standards. The Ombudsman issued a series of suggestions in order to improve what the Commission was doing at the time. So several of the suggestions are on the slide. The Ombudsman advised the Commission to provide web content in accessible formats that meet higher international standards than the Commission was offering at the time. It also advised the Commission to adopt an action plan on web accessibility and to keep the Ombudsman informed of its plans and if its timeline to comply with web content accessibility guidelines. Also, another suggestion that the Ombudsman had is that the Commission online tools and websites should include accessibility statements, and that also they should include opportunities for people to provide feedback in order to improve the system further. And finally, I would like to talk about another topic that in recent years has really been at the heart of what our office does in the field of disability-related work, apart from complaints, and including, so both including complaints received from complainants, but also own initiative work. So this is the topic of deinstitutionalization and the use of EU funds. And here we have mentioned the case numbers. Again, I would advise the full decisions, the full chronology of how the cases went about are on the website if you're interested. But generally, what the cases concerned are institutional care facilities that were funded partially or in certain cases substantially by EU funding. I understand also that one of the complainants, or a representative of one of the organizations and one of the complainants is here. So we look forward to hearing their feedback later on. On the next slide, you could see how the Ombudsman went about in these complaints, or what she asked the Commission about. So the Ombudsman invited the Commission to seek to adhere to the greatest extent possible to the UN Convention, to the CRPD, the guidance issued by the committee, and more specifically, the indication that EU funds should not be used to maintain existing institutions, but that they should be used to foster deinstitutionalization. And the Ombudsman also pointed out that new building projects cannot obstruct the progress on deinstitutionalization. And again, the Ombudsman invited the Commission to verify when it finances projects, to verify from the outset whether projects that receive European funds support the construction of new institutions, and to seek to suspend funding when necessary, when that was not the case. Based on those two complaints, in both cases, the Commission responded positively. It engaged with the Ombudsman and what the Ombudsman was advocated for. It in particular emphasized that in the follow-up programming period, indeed, deinstitutionalization will be at the heart of the follow-up programming period, because the cases concerned earlier programming and earlier funds. And so the Commission emphasized that transition towards community and family-based services will be really better looked at subsequently. We have received, of course, some follow-up feedback from the complainants in both cases. And on the next slide, we could see just a sum-up feedback from the first case, where the Ombudsman it was suggested by the complainant, a civil society organization from Hungary. It was suggested that the Ombudsman could consider a broader investigation of how fundamental rights are respected and complied with in what concerns persons with disabilities under the EU's cohesion policy. And here I would like to make the link with complaints and own initiative work of the Ombudsman, because in this case, as a follow-up to these cases, the Ombudsman opened a own initiative inquiry last year, and the inquiry in particular concerned how the European Commission monitors EU funds used to promote the rights of persons with disabilities and older persons to independent living. The inquiry concerns a series of questions that our office sent to the Commission to follow up. And of course, it further situates it in the COVID-19 emergency and some of the issues that transpired of that. We have now received the Commission's reply to that, and we have proposed it for targeted public consultation. The EDF is one of the organizations which we are consulting, and we really look forward to hearing from organizations, from the EDF and from other organizations that we contacted about how the Commission's reply and the Commission's position lives up or does not live up to the standards that this funding should comply with. Maybe just one extra minute, nevertheless, to mention about what in a gist the Commission told us, and we found to be an interesting, maybe a further development, is that for the 2021-2027 programming period, the Commission says that there's an enabling conditions. So those are prerequisites to ensure that the requirement for the effective and efficient use of the EU funds are met. And in this case, the Commission says that there should be national frameworks by all beneficiaries. They should have national frameworks in place to ensure implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the compliance with the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. So I think I will stop there in order to have more time for questions. But I hope that if you'd like, we can, of course, send links and more information on all of these complaints. And I hope that they, in a way, demonstrate the potential that our office has and the range of the issues that we have handled and could handle in the future.
This is great. Valentina, if just wait there for a second, and can you stop sharing the presentation for a second, Maureen? I just want to quickly we're a little bit over time, but we see from people that there's a lot of questions. I want to quickly ask you before I come to Camille. In general, how long does a complaint handling last? This was one of the questions that came up here. I see Martha's also answering questions here. She's saying that they would decide on the opening of an inquiry admissibility within 30 days. And the inquiry could take 1 year or 1 month. That depends on what the complaint is about. So this is answered. Thank you very much, Martha. And there was also a question on the accessibility of the website, and I added there the accessibility statement. And then there was another question. Martha, if you want to come back for a second as well, just on this one question, so I think that as far as I understand, the complaints form on the website is accessible and it can be navigated to with the screen reader, and that you've had this checked. There was another question about whether a complaint could be issued in sign language. I'm just keeping our two colleagues here for the moment for a second to...
Look, I mean, we never received a complaint in sign language, but I think we could deal with the complaint in the sign language. If, for instance, I could imagine you send us a video, because we don't have possibility online, but if you send us a video or in this form, we could find a solution to know what the complaints, to translate the complaint, like we do with complaints in all languages. We cannot speak statistical languages of the European Union, but it's not always the case. So I would say Definitely, yes.
Very good. This is great. So I have some good news as well for the proceedings that we have, is that our interpreters have agreed to go an extra 10 minutes so that we can still have questions and answers. And I really appreciate, Martha, that you were looking at the questions there in the chat box. And it's giving me a lot of ideas for the kind of things we could do in future to give people further information. Just to let all participants know, we also had questions on whether the European Ombudsman handles queries related to issues outside the EU. And Martha handled already, she said the External Action Service had also been subject to 14 different admissible complaints. And you can find them. I want to say this as a final word. I find your website really easy to use, because both with the complaint register number, but also with the search functions, it's possible to find out what's been complained about in different realms. And transparency is like all the letters that the Ombudsman sends formally to the institutions, you can find them all online. So this makes it very easy to for you to know what the European Ombudsman is doing. So now another question about an audio recording of a complaint, but I think what I'll do is we'll move to Camille to tell about his experience of making a complaint, and then we'll bring back our speakers and Camille for any last questions. And we'll be keeping an eye on those questions that are coming in the meantime. Thank you very much, Martha and Valentina, for the really, oh, a last question. Will it be okay for us to share your presentation with our members in our members area? Is that all right? Because excellent, that's very good. Thank you very much. So Camille, are you with us there? Camille, would you mind not showing your presentation and telling us your example instead? Because I think people have had a lot of visual, and maybe just you telling firsthand what you wanted to tell us. It will go quicker, and then people will engage a bit more and ask you more questions. Is that okay?
Yes, sure. I mean, sorry for
fabulous.
It's not important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we would like to share your presentation, if that's okay, so people have more details. But you can see, our participants can see how important the email complaints have been in their process of looking at the funds. So people know about it already, but it would be great to hear directly from you about your experience in doing that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you as well. And I mean, if I speak too much or too quick, please let me know. And my presentation is, of course, available for everyone to get it afterwards, no problem. I will not share my personal experience of complaints, but of the experience of Enil. I don't have my own experience. Maybe I will complain now against the Ombudsman for speaking too much. No, I'm kidding. I would present you the case that was presented in the end by Valentina about the complaint to the European Ombudsman regarding the investment of European structural and investment funds into institutions for disabled people in Hungary and Portugal. Very briefly, to give you an idea of the timeline, we submitted the complaint in June 2019. The Ombudsman asked us to the inspection report, our comments to the inspection report in March 2020. We sent the comments, in April 2020, and the Ombudsman decision was announced in July 2020. So this is how, for you to have understanding how the timeline goes, more or less. The background, very briefly, even though there was part of it explained, but let me bring it also from maybe our perspective and in general to reply again and say again. So Enil has been monitoring the use of EU funds since 2007, and we published several reports and national reports, and helped our national members to publish reports and complaints. And we have brought many cases to the light where EU funds were used for building or the renovation of residential institutions for disabled people in the EU, either small institutions or smaller ones or big ones. It was also included in our shadow report to the implementation of Article 19 in the EU, and even in the contribution to the European Ombudsman own initiative inquiry to the use of ESI funds. And coming to, let's say, this case, after the European Commission refused to take any action, because, first you have to go to commission and to say, look, what is happening is not okay. And I mean, after they refused to take any action, we decided to turn to the European Ombudsman. And the complaint, what I will speak about, relates specifically, let's divide it into three parts. One is to the misuse of EU funds in Hungary, one is to the misuse of funds in Portugal, and it's also related to the note by the legal service of the European Commission, which justify investment in institutions. And I think this is the most interesting one. I mean, because the other one will also a bit explain it. So very briefly to give you to tell you the facts, so you have an idea. So in Hungary, there was a call for proposals from the government, which was the aim of that was that the program was that, according to the government, to close down or repurpose institution housing that have for a large number of people with disabilities, and to increase inclusion of disabled people in the community and provide them with individualized support. Under the call, we saw that the residential institution providing social care services for more than 50 persons were encouraged to apply for grants, and we are funded by the ERDF, the European Regional and Development Fund. As a result, in Hungary, the plan was to build 189 group homes for up to 1,200 people with disabilities, which of course is not a good result if you ask me. It affects more than 2,000 people, with many located of these group homes, many located away from towns and in inhabited rural areas. So despite the evidence sent to the Commission, which shows that the EU-funded facilities are likely to perpetuate segregation and social exclusion of disabled people, the Commission refused to instruct managing authorities to suspend the call or revise the criteria, according to the CRPD and this kind of things. And all our concerns and allegations were confirmed afterwards when a UN inquiry report into Hungary under optional protocol to the CRPD, said the same thing. So this is about Hungary. About Portugal, it's in 2018. The other one was 2017. So in 2018, we learned that a new residential institution was built in the Azores Island, again founded by ERDF. The aim, according to what they published, was to promote qualified occupation that contributes to the well-being development strategies of reinforcement of self-esteem and valorization. I mean, for me, it's already a tricky statement, but okay. We as ENIL exchanged correspondence and had several meetings with the responsible people in the Commission in the DG Regio, and asked Commission to intervene and ensure that residents are provided with required community-based alternatives in line with CRPD. And although Commission acknowledged during the meetings and also in writing, and I want to emphasize that we have a writing acknowledgement that the EU-founded facility was in institutions, they refused to take any concrete actions towards the managing authorities that would result, in founding return it or suspend it or whatever it's happening every time. So this is not the only case in Portugal, and we were aware for other issues that institutions were founded by EU funds, and this was also mentioned in our complaint. And the third, let's say, part of our complaint was about the European Commission legal opinion. The legal service note is an internal European Commission document sent by the legal service to the DGO and DG Employment. It was uncovered by when asked by the OHCHR office in Brussels. This note deals with the questions of whether ESI funds, European Structural Investment Funds, can provide support for long-stay residential institutions such as homes for disabled people, mental health problems, and children deprived of parental care. So basically, we were asking if you can found institutions with EU funds. And now someone would expect that the answer would be, of course, no. But the answer of this legal service was that there is no prohibition for the ESI funds to support under thematic objective 9 or any other objective long-stay residential institutions. Furthermore, which is, devastating. Furthermore, it confirmed that support from ESI funds to social or medical institutions which ensure independent living or are embedded in transition process from institutional to community-based care and to residential institutions for persons requiring constant care and medical supervision is also allowed. I don't know any institutions who is ensuring and supporting independent living, but okay, that's discussion for another time. So the European Commission refused to withdraw or revise the note, even after intervention from the US CRPD committee. So the committee came to them and said, this is not okay. And they refused to act. So we expressed concerns about this, about the problems in Hungary and Portugal and the founding of institutions with European money, and about this legal service note, which means that by providing internal guidance to the Commission services to act against EU legal obligations under the CRPD and other laws, the Commission is directly contributing to continue institutionalization of children and disabled people in member states, and is failing on its commitments to improve access for disabled people to services and facilities that facilitate the right to live independently in the community. So we, of course, had a legal basis behind that, because you cannot go and just complain and say, I don't like this. I will not analyze that, our legal basis. I can say that we had the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, we had the Convention, of course, the General Comment number 5, which is very often ignored, and the various regulations in the EU funds and so on. There is a strong legal base behind our complaint. And what they requested, so it's very briefly, was that the Commission should revise its legal position on the use of EU funds in consultation with CRPD committee and DPOs, to recommend that the Commission, we recommended the Commission to initiate an infringement proceedings against Hungary for perpetuating social exclusion of disabled people in institutional care, and the same for Portugal. We also recommended the Commission to work with Hungarian managing authorities to revise the relevant course, and make it decent. And we also recommended that the Commission obtains detailed plans for the use of funds and prevents investment in projects that fail to facilitate the right to live independently in the community. And this should be publicly available. And finally, we recommended, as also recommended by the Ombudsman, that it is essential that the Commission is fully exercising its monitoring, control, and enforcement powers to prevent the breach of CRPD. So the European Ombudsman decision is that there is no maladministration, which, okay, we can discuss if this is indeed the case. While the Ombudsman identified shortcomings, as we already had in the case, and it found that the Commission has done a few things wrong, in the end, it was decided that the Commission has taken action to address many of the problems identified, so no further inquiries are justified at this stage. So Ombudsman very briefly said that Commission should verify from the outset project that the safe ESI funds, and it should seek to suspend funding when necessary, that Commission should follow up on the reports drawn by the relevant expert in the case of Hungary and Portugal, because this expert says that there were problems, and that Commission should also inform the Ombudsman of the latest developments as regarding the 21-27 programming period and how the Commission intends to strengthen the focus on the transition from institutional to community-based family services. And I'm finishing with this, with our reflection, and this is 1 more minute and I'm stopping, that with our reflections are that the Ombudsman recognizes that the Commission should have intervened in Hungary at an earlier stage to prevent investment into institutions. However, the Ombudsman found that Commission has taken action and therefore there was no maladministration. In our assessment, taking action when there are no results is insufficient. And both Hungary and Portugal built institutions for disabled people with EU funds without anyone being held accountable for the violation of CRPD and other law. So I mean, okay, they took actions according to the Ombudsman, but the institutions were built and people are in institutions and no one is held accountable. Also, the Ombudsman said that the Ombudsman did not issue any recommendation on the legal service note because of ENIL having a court case on Bulgaria against the Commission. At that point, I think we are the only ones who took the Commission to the court for institutionalizing people with EU funds. But this was, I mean, it was at the same time, but this case was about a different thing, not about the legal service note, and concerned another country. So, I mean, it was not really connected. The Ombudsman also relied on the excuses and promises of the Commission for the future, whereas our complaint was about projects that were completed and had already violated the rights of independent living of I mean, hundreds of people. And in conclusion, the Ombudsman was too lenient towards the European Commission and missed the opportunity to sanction misuse of EU funding and to help prevent future investment into institutions. So this is our experience. I want to thank you and apologize if I took too much time. And if
no, you didn't take too much time. We just didn't give enough time for the overall workshop because it would be much better. I think now on reflection, we should have taken longer because one of the issues that comes up is that the Ombudsman has a very a limited mandate on maladministration, and the case you're describing involves many levels of accountability and many breaches of the CRPD, both from the national authorities, and you're taking the angle of the EU money, which is extremely important. But of course, when we think about enforcement, we have to think about all the different spaces there are to complain in order to hold all the authorities accountable. And something as comprehensive as the UN Convention includes, you know, I think that we need to, and this is something that myself and Maureen will discuss afterwards with Martha and Valentina, is to look at something which looks at all the different levels. So when you're at the national level looking at a breach, you have your equality body, you have the national ombudsman, you have there's a range of different places that we have, and the EU Ombudsman is looking at maladministration. And you were talking there about the limits of the decision, but the fact is the decision has given, and the investigation, firstly the work of ENIL, the complaints of ENIL, and then the response of the Ombudsman has given a lot of visibility to this issue, and it has highlighted the grave risks there are in relation to institutionalization and funding. So I think you may have shown a lot the limits at the end, but the reality is that your work has actually given a lot of visibility and attention to the issues. And there, I'm happy that you put your camera on, Martha, to come back here.
Yes, thank you very much, Carmen. I mean, it's I always would love to meet our complainants after the investigations, because then you can really know what work means for you and for us, our service. Look, I mean, there are many comments about this, but one thing I will tell you, this case involved a lot of lawyers inside of the office. We tried it by different means. Our procedural, investigative powers are not the court's powers. We are quite limited, but we tried to see all. I mean, we saw a lot of documents from the Commission. We met them, and yeah, the issue of the legal service opinion is something which stayed in my heart. I cannot, forget about this. And in whatever other investigation, the Ombudsman is coming onto this subject. Valentina mentioned her ex officio investigation right now, which also is about the issue of funds. I mean, this comes back all the time, you know, this legal opinion stays with us. And I understand your reaction, absolutely. But there was, I cannot go into details now, but there was really no possibility to look specifically into this legal opinion, because we could kill the entire thing. And the Ombudsman approach is also like that. Of course, we could criticize. Of course, we could have from the Commission the defensive attitude, and we will go into exchanges for half year or so, or even, I mean, involving Parliament, maybe, I don't know. But whether we will get something, I'm not sure. And the Ombudsman tried to be somehow reactive, of course, always to complaints, but also proactive and think about the future. And I think what we will get now with this investigation ex officio, which is finally originated with your complaint, now we do it generally. I think here the Ombudsman decision would be very important. I think here we would need to touch all the things we could not touch when dealing with complaints, individual complaints, your case and the case before concerning Hungary. You know? So, but well, I would love to talk to you with you, Camille. This is an incredibly interesting subject.
Yeah, and we won't. By the way, everyone, this is we will have an important collaboration also with all of the with our members, with the disability movement in Europe, and the members of the EU monitoring framework around the review by the EU by the CRPD committee next year. And one of the instruments that the EU has for implementation of the convention is, of course, the funding, and the committee will look very carefully at their interpretation, not the Commission's legal service opinion, but the CRPD committee's opinion on the extent to which the responsibilities of the Commission in terms of controlling and infringement procedures and so forth on the funds. But I think that I would like, if Valentina come back, in case you have any other things you want to add. I only regret that we were short today, so we didn't have a chance to go in depth. We will create for everyone a full report of the event with the links so everyone sees, and we will discuss within our team and also with Marta and Valentina what kind of assistance and support we can give to members and discuss with members. And I think, Marta, one reflection I have is, at another workshop, if we did next year, we include also a national ombudsman. So the national ombudsman perspective is there as well to see how complementary that is. And indeed, Camille, based on some of the things you said, I think it would be good for us to ask the Commission to also present how they launch infringement procedures and how our members can also approach them with, you know, evidence and information on when EU legislation has not been implemented properly, because of course we have a whole range of excellent legislation in place and it needs to be implemented and needs to be kept alive. And one of the ways to keep it alive is by rights holders informing and complaining when their rights are not being fulfilled. So we'll make sure we'll continue. This will be the beginning of a process, Martha and Valentina and Camille, rather than the end today, because we realize the things people are interested to know about. And we've taken all of the information as well from the chat box. So anything that didn't get answered, we will address in the questions. And Martha, we will send you the report on the workshop in case there's any additional things that you want to include. Camille or Martha or Valentina, did you have any last words you wanted to say before I close?
Just to thank everyone for following the session and to say that we are happy to cooperate in the future and to launch even more complaints if needed, so everyone can leave institutions and be living in the same way other people live.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank you. Same from me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to what we had to say. And indeed, we look forward to receiving complaints from you. We look forward to talking to you in other sessions or if you need to reach us. Thank you.
And the same for me. Thank you. And really, Catherine, you said that we will meet again. So
yes,
we're ready for this.
We
hope a lot for this meeting. So
thank you so much.
Thank you for having thought about this meeting now and in the future.
And so thank you to our speakers and experts from today, to our captioner and also our technical setup that we were able to have the interpreted captioning, to our sign language interpreters, and to Raquel and Maureen for organizing. And I really, really appreciate your participation today. And we will be back in touch with all the our participants with the rest and the complementary information soon. Have a very good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.